Have you ever thought, there's got to be a better and simpler way to learn organizational strategies? 5 Minutes Learning has a global and diverse collection of case studies to help management students. Click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming and interesting case studies. Imagine the year is 1998, and you're sitting in a darkened suite at the historic Metropole Hotel in Moscow. You're the founder and senior chairman of McDonald's Russia, George Cohon, and you're facing a major challenge. Outside, the country is in a state of emergency. Russia's currency, the ruble, has plummeted, causing inflation and economic disarray. Your job is to keep your McDonald's restaurants open in this uncertain and volatile business climate. But Cohon is no stranger to challenges. Back in 1966, he met Ray Kroc, the man who transformed McDonald's into an American household name. Kroc was so impressed with Cohon that he offered him exclusive perpetual rights to McDonald's in Eastern Canada. Cohon accepted the challenge, scraped together the $70,000 he needed to get started, and opened his first restaurant in 1968. By 1981, he had turned McDonald's into the largest food service organization in Canada. But Cohon's success in Canada pales in comparison to his accomplishments in Russia. It took him 14 years to bring McDonald's to the former Soviet Union, and he had to overcome huge obstacles associated with building a reliable supply chain in a country with an outdated agricultural infrastructure. When the country's first McDonald's restaurant opened in Moscow in 1990, it was a major international story, the biggest in company history. More than 30,000 Russians sampled their first McDonald's meal that day, as Western journalists like Dan Rather broadcasted the story live to viewers around the world. Now, 8 years later, the Russian ruble is in free fall. Before the crisis hit, the original McDonald's in Pushkin Square and the other 25 McDonald's restaurants situated throughout Russia had been among the busiest in the world. As a result of the crisis, however, traffic in all of the restaurants had dropped off to a trickle. Cohon's biggest question was how to bring people back into the restaurants. But Cohon had a long-term mindset. He didn't want to overreact or do anything that would create long-term problems for the company. Instead, he and Kazbulatov worked to find solutions to keep the restaurants open and get people back in the doors. And eventually, they succeeded. McDonald's Russia not only survived the crisis but thrived in the years to come. It's a testament to the resilience and innovation of McDonald's and its leaders, and a reminder that even in the toughest of times, there is always a way forward. In 1976, Frederick Cohon was attending the Montreal Olympic Games when he met a group of Soviet dignitaries. Cohon took the officials to a nearby McDonald's for a snack, where they were blown away by the quality, cheerfulness, and cleanliness of the restaurant. Cohon then asked the head of the delegation if they thought their people would like a McDonald's in the Soviet Union. The answer was a resounding yes. Cohon was inspired by the idea of bringing McDonald's to the Soviet Union, which had a population of 290 million people, was bigger than the United States, and whose people were proud to eat the kind of food McDonald's sold. Cohon knew that bringing McDonald's to Moscow would be no easy task, given that most Russians had no concept of fast food. He recognized a massive opportunity between the two kinds of restaurants in Moscow: formal dining rooms that were incredibly rigid, and small, informal cafes that were pretty depressing. Cohon began traveling to the Soviet Union 5 or 6 times a year to meet with Moscow city representatives and Kremlin officials, despite the overwhelming maze of bureaucracy he encountered. He learned to treat frustration and delay like nature's force of gravity. This was during the height of the Cold War, and the Soviet Union was considered the evil empire. It took 3 years for Cohon to finally reach an agreement with the Soviets, but it was called off 17 days later. Undaunted, Cohon continued to travel to the Soviet Union and pitch his idea to any government official who would listen. In 1985, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev introduced the revolutionary idea of perestroika, and the Soviet hold on culture and business began to thaw. Then, in 1987, the Kremlin passed a new law on joint ventures, easing restrictions on the importation of foreign capital, technology, and expertise. In 1988, after 12 years of arduous hamburger diplomacy, Cohon finally received official approval to bring McDonald's to Moscow. Cohon believes that the timing was right, and the country had been frozen in ice for decades. Bringing McDonald's to the Soviet Union was a massive undertaking, but it marked a significant turning point in the country's history. The first McDonald's opened in Russia after 14 years of struggle. In a darkened suite at the historic Metropole Hotel in Moscow, Cohon huddled with Kamzat Kazbulatov, president of McDonald's Russia, to strategize. The two men knew that they couldn't lay off any of their trained employees or abandon their long-term commitment to the Russian market. But with restaurant volumes plummeting, they needed to find a way to keep the brand in customers' minds and bring them back to their restaurants. Despite the fact that imports were largely frozen, the company's supply chain remained intact. And so, Cohon and his team had to make two key decisions to turn things around. First, they would need to focus on the quality of their food and service to retain customer loyalty, and second, they would need to find a way to advertise and market their brand to keep it at the forefront of customers' minds. It was a difficult and uncertain time, but Cohon was determined to weather the storm and keep McDonald's Russia afloat. And with his team's dedication and hard work, they would eventually overcome the challenges and come out stronger on the other side. It was the height of the economic crisis in Russia, and McDonald's was facing a tough decision. Should they raise their prices like every other business or try a more creative solution? George Cohon, founder of McDonald's Russia, knew that raising prices could turn away customers, but keeping them low could mean losing money. He needed to think outside the box. That's when he came up with a radical idea. What if they advertised guaranteed prices on national television for a month? It was risky, especially with the volatile currency, but Cohon believed it was worth a shot. And it worked. People flocked to McDonald's, drawn in by the promise of stable prices. It was a bold move that paid off, showing that sometimes taking a risk can lead to big rewards. It was a tough time for McDonald's in Russia. With the country's economy in shambles, the restaurants were practically empty. The senior chairman, George Cohon, knew he had to make some tough decisions to keep the business afloat. One of the big decisions had to do with the menu. McDonald's had always stuck to its core menu items, but Cohon was considering adding some Russia-specific options. Cabbage salads, grilled cheese sandwiches, and even soups made with locally sourced ingredients were all on the table. But there was a risk of changing the menu. McDonald's had worked for years to establish its brand in Russia, and changing the menu could jeopardize that. Cohon knew he had to strike a balance between keeping the brand intact and giving customers a reason to come back. In the end, they decided to go for it. The new items were cheaper to produce and could be sold at lower prices, making McDonald's more accessible to people struggling in these tough economic times. And it worked. People started coming back to the restaurants, and McDonald's was able to weather the storm. It was a tough time, but McDonald's in Russia emerged stronger for it. Sometimes, taking risks and trying new things is the only way to stay afloat. Thank you so much for listening to this video. Do not forget to subscribe this YouTube channel for receiving updates about my upcoming case study videos.